I'm Faisal, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm the publisher and editor of Using My Maps magazine, a free magazine on the iPad, iPhone, Android smartphone, and tablet. I've been publishing tips, tools, techniques, resources, and opinions of leading mind mapping experts to make you more successful at work, in your business, in your education, in your personal life for more than 2 years now. And in this video, I'd like to cover a problem which I see many people have, going from the linear world to the mind map world and back again. Before I start with this video, I'd like to remind you that I have two other videos in the series. The first one was on why you need to have a lifelong learning strategy or lifelong learning system and why it's important. And the second one, I gave you 10 steps to show you exactly what you need to do to put together your own learning management program. Let's get started with the current topic at hand. First of all, is there a problem? Well, I like to set the scene by saying that I was schooled linearly, and I think, and many of you probably have been as well, and I struggled to convert initially from the linear world to the mind mapping world. While the mind mapping laws seemed easy on the surface, I found it actually difficult to implement. And initially, I largely used it for personal mind maps because I was afraid to share my mind maps with anybody else. I also found that most of the material that around us is actually delivered linearly. For example, books, journals, magazines, websites, etc. are all delivered linearly. Even Tony Buzan, the inventor of mind maps, writes books. And these books are naturally linear constructs like most other books are. Now, because I had this problem, I tried to figure out what's the best way for me to actually move from the linear world to the mind mapping world. So I created an interim construct which sat between the linear world and the pure mind map. And I call this a mind map tutor because a tutor actually guides one through a subject, and that's exactly what these mind map tutors became. They were guides through the various topics that I tackled, and I felt I could tackle any topic and put it into a mind map tutor that I could actually share with others. The mind map tutor maintains the basic mind map structure. The principles of having a strong central image, hierarchies, associations, images, color, and radiant thinking are all incorporated in this mind map tutor. I do break one important rule, however, and that is the one word per line rule. For those of you who know Tony Buzan's mind mapping laws, you know this is quite important to him. But I found creating mind maps that I could share with one word per branch very, very difficult to do. When I tried to create mind maps with only key recall words on it, I found it almost impossible to do in the first place, and I also found it very dangerous when I got it wrong, because it could actually recall the incorrect information. And this was also illustrated in Tony Buzan's book, Use Your Head, when he warned us against choosing the wrong recall words because it will actually get you to recall the wrong information. I found it interesting that Tony Buzan includes proto mind maps in his Mind Maps for Business book. He says while they differ to pure mind maps, they are still a potent force as neurozone zapping memory enhancers and smarter thinking catalysts. To me, that's quite a mouthful. I would just like to say that I think the mind map tutors that I create are quite useful. Now, I divide notes into two components, note making and note taking. Note taking is where I want to capture other people's ideas, and I often use a mind map tutor because it can accurately capture what is being said and I can share it easily with others. And this is where I actually break the laws, especially the one word per line law, more often. Note making is when I capture my own ideas, and in many instances I use pure mind maps in the situation where I use one word per branch because the goal is actually to liberate the words because I'm looking for multiple meanings, I'm looking for creativity, associations, alternatives, or solution to a problem. So that's briefly my note-taking system. Let's get back to the problem at hand. How do I go from the linear world to the mind mapping world? Before I actually create mind maps, I actually organize my linear notes in a hierarchical fashion. And I often use this before and after I've created a mind map tutor because as the heading says, the central image says over here, we're going from linear to mind map and back again, because when you want to communicate to the outside world, many of them are linear thinkers, and you often have to present in a linear fashion, whether it be writing a blog post, a thesis, or a PowerPoint presentation. The way I structure my linear notes is using the outline method. Now, the outline method can even be done in a word processor like Microsoft Word, where you divide your content into headings, subheadings, and bullets. If you want to capture more information, I often use what is called the canal method. And I go into more details in the canal method when I actually teach people this system in more depth. But basically, the canal method divides your page um, into two columns. The left-hand side contains your keywords or your hierarchy, like your headings, subheadings, and bullets, and the right-hand side contains the actual detailed notes. Now, these detailed notes work together, and they can actually be captured into mind mapping software because the keywords and headings and subheadings become your main branches, your sub branches, etc. in your mind map, and you can paste the notes directly into the notes section of your mind mapping software. Most mind mapping software tools have a place where you can store notes attached to the branch. In that way, you can actually capture large volumes of information and still have a visual guide through the material. Now, as many of you may know, and I've mentioned it before, I'm a bit of a systems person and a process person. So what is this process that I use? Well, it's quite simple. I've decided that it works best for me. No, I haven't decided. With experiments and tests, I found that by starting with a high-level overview and then drilling into details actually works best for me. And each mind map actually has a limited amount of information that I can actually, so that I can remember it easier. So you will see my mind maps don't generally have lots and lots of information on the one mind map. I rather use linked mind maps when I drill from one to the other, where each branch could actually become the central image of a new mind map. Now, the best way to illustrate this is with a case study. And I've actually mind mapped the whole 7 Habits of Highly Effective book by Stephen R. Covey. And I'm going to present it to you as a case study in the next video. For those of you who want to end here, you can do so now because the next video is essentially, could be a standalone video. Okay, so here we are with an overview of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. As you can see, the book is divided actually into 4 parts: the paradigms and principles, private victory, public victory, and renewal. So those are the key concepts in the book. The first bit explains the reason behind it and why he wrote the book, etc. The second one starts with the first 3 habits, and these 3 habits get you to what he calls independence. And I'll go into the details, obviously, when I go into the details of the book itself. The second part is a public victory, which he says, which takes you to interdependence, and those are the 3 habits in that section. And finally, it ends with renewal, which is sharpening the saw and revisiting the first principles again. Now, what I normally do is when I start a book or something, a big, large volume of work, I create this high-level overview mind map because I can actually memorize this quite easily, and it actually gives me the framework to which I attach information as I'm actually going through the material. So this is the high-level overview that I spoke about. Then the next step I actually do is I create a linked mind map which joins, for example, to this branch. And once again, I've got a very simple diagram that I can memorize and burn into memory and then drill into the details. So let's talk a bit about the book itself And I'm going to try to teach you the principles of the whole book in this video. It's quite a challenge, but let's see how it goes. He starts off with what he calls a character ethic. He says, centuries ago, character was very, very important. Basic principles like integrity, humility, justice, and courage was what most motivational and religious literature was based on. It tried to create a person that had these basic principles in place. And that was true of all the major world religions or cultures. But then he saw a shift. For the last 200 years or so, people started shifting to what he calls the personality ethic, where they taught you tricks to get what you want, and that's often based on bad principles. He wants to restore the character ethic. And the only way to restore the character ethic is to start inside out, where you work on your character first. By working on your character first, you'll get some private victories first, because as you develop your character, you get some small wins. And once you feel that your character has been developed to a certain level, you can actually then take it to the world and get some public victories. And all these methods are based on certain principles which he believes are universal. The 7 habits naturally take you through this process. And the process that it takes you, he calls it a maturity model, which takes you from the basics to advanced level. The first phase, what he calls dependence, can best be illustrated when we are children. When you're a child, your state of being, your state of well-being is often dictated by those around you, particularly your parents or your siblings. And so you are highly dependent on them for your well-being and the way you feel. But as you work through the habits, you'll get to a state of independence where other people are not that important in the way you feel or the way you live your life. That's a state of independence. But he believes that the ultimate goal is to get to interdependence, where you can actually work with other people in a synergistic way. But I feel I'm already going into too much detail. I'll cover that as we work through the 7 habits and show you how it naturally progresses through this maturity model. The book wants to make you more effective. After all, that is the title. But what is effective? What is effectiveness? Stephen R. Covey defines it as PPC balance, production and production capability balance. And I'll use a simple example that we can all understand. That is your car. The production ability of your car, or capability of your car, is to actually drive it. It must be able to run and take you from point A to point B. Looking after the production capability is when you service your car. Now, if you don't service your car regularly, it will eventually break down. Hence, feeding your production capability at regular intervals will make your car more effective over a longer period of time. That is the basic principle. If you balance your production, your output, and your production capability, nurturing your ability to create this output, you will be more effective. And that, in a nutshell, are the paradigms and principles of the 7 habits of highly effective people. Oh, before I go, why the word paradigm? Stephen R. Covey describes paradigm as the way you view your world, the lens through which you view your world. Hence, I've got the magnifying glass in the world over there. And he says many of us have to undergo what they call a paradigm shift and see the world in a different way. And this 7 habits will allow you to see the world in a different way and make you more effective. Okay, so that's the first part. You can see I can go back up to the main mind map and then drill into the next branch, which is private victory. Now, under private victory comes the first 3 habits. And the first habit of all is actually one of the goals, the one he believes the most important habit, because he says that's what differentiates us from the animals. An animal is naturally reactive. If you kick a dog, it will want to bite you. So humans are different to animals. We can be proactive, which is the opposite of reactive. We can receive a stimulus, pause, choose how we want to react, and then react. And in that choice is our humanness, and that is based on our character. So if you develop a strong character using these principles, you will react in more appropriate ways. Hence, the term proactive. And that is the ultimate goal, to be proactive using these habits. The first step in doing anything is beginning with the end in mind. He made a statement that everything is created twice, first in your mind and then in reality. Now, picture yourself lying on your deathbed. I know it's a bit morbid, but please bear with me. Picture the people around you. Picture what they are saying about you. What are the principles that you want to be remembered by? This becomes your frame of reference. And if you use this as your frame of reference in life, you may react very differently to the way you are at the moment. This can be taken and broken down into smaller, into what he calls roles and goals as well, because you can ask the question, how do I want to be remembered as a spouse, as a sibling, as a child, as a parent, as a worker, etc. But by having the end in mind, you can set your compass in that direction and work towards it. The third habit is often classified under the time management banner in most self-help and business books. He says it's not so much about managing your time, but about managing yourself and organizing around priorities. And the priorities, he says, are determined by two things: importance and urgency. You must learn to say no to unimportant things. So if you say no to unimportant things, you will only be focusing on important things. Now, these important things can either be important or it can be urgent. It can be important and not urgent as well. Let's take the car example again. It's important that you service your car regularly, but typically it is not urgent. The service light can come on and you can drive for many weeks or even months without servicing the car, until the point that it breaks down. Then it becomes urgent. So he says the more time you spend on important stuff that are not urgent, the less time you'll spend on important stuff that are urgent. He uses what he calls a four-quadrant matrix to manage time. I can't go into the details in this video, but the basics are that it's based on importance and urgency. Okay, so that is the first three habits under private victory. And he says once you've gone through these three habits and practiced it, you will start living an independent life where you are in control of what you are doing in your life, because you're only focusing on what's important to you. The next section is public victory. Now, as I said before, the goal is actually interdependence, because he believes that it's better than independence. After the last three habits, you will be living a life based on what you feel is important. Therefore, you'll be living an independent life. And you need this independence first before you can get to the next level, which is interdependence. Along the way, though, while you are living this independent life, he says that you should start depositing into people's emotional bank accounts. An emotional bank account is very similar to a financial bank account. When you put in deposits, you actually become positive. And if you make withdrawals, which is negative, if you make less withdrawals than you deposit, you'll always have a positive balance. So if your goal is always to have a positive balance with people around you, by depositing more than you withdraw, you will naturally start nurturing a relationship that is interdependent. One of the main mindsets about creating interdependent relationships is thinking win-win or no deal. It's not only win-win. The no-deal component often requires a lot of courage. The thinking win-win requires a lot of consideration for the other person's well-being and your own well-being. So with this high consideration and high courage, if you use this tool to go in every negotiation, every deal, you will find that you start thinking more with a win-win mentality, more with an abundance mentality. And the way to do this is not to compromise. He says it's a better solution than meeting you halfway. It is actually thinking of a third alternative that is better than either one of us proposed. That is the think win-win habit. Now, the seek first to understand habit is actually often misunderstood, even though he believes this is one of the most important interpersonal principles that you can actually have. Because the second part of the habit is actually then to be understood. So you must seek first to understand, because people often ask me, Faisal, but if I'm continually seeking to understand, when do I get hurt? I said, well, the habit consists of two parts. The first is seeking to understand and then to be understood. You must diagnose before you prescribe. It does not mean that you must not get your voice heard, but you must. But once the other person feels that you understand him or her, the easier it will be for them to actually listen to you. So this is the key to effective communication, and you need empathetic listening, where you can put yourself in the other person's shoes, and you must listen to actually understand what they're trying to say. That is the fifth habit. Now the sixth habit is, he says, where you actually want to be. It's the highest activity in life, when you're actually creating solutions that are greater than the sum of the parts. 1 plus 1 is equal to 3 in this instance, where you get to solutions that are better than what the individuals themselves could propose. And you get this by always looking for the third alternative. So that is the next part, the public victory component, and you'll end up being interdependent and synergize with others. Finally, we come to the renewal part. This is where you sharpen the saw. And he often uses this analogy of sharpening the saw. And the example he quotes in his book is that you're walking through a forest, you find somebody cutting down a tree, sweating profusely. You ask the person, why did you pause a moment and sharpen the saw? To which the person replies, can't you see I'm too busy sawing? Are you too busy sawing? Have you taken time to focus on the physical, social, emotional, spiritual, and mental aspects of your life? By spending time like that, you'll always be sharp, and you will be more effective over time. Another component of actually sharpening the saw is going back to basics on a regular basis. So let's go back to the inside out again. The most important habit that you can develop is the habit of what he calls proactivity, which is not reactive, because that is what differentiates us from the animal kingdom. He says there's a gap between stimulus and response. And if you learn to stand in that gap and choose your response based on the character that you've developed, you will become more effective over time. And over time, you'll actually be able to influence the stimulus. So that is even another level of development. So that basically is the 7 habits of highly effective people in a nutshell. I hope I did it justice, and I hope you can see how I actually use my linked mind maps and my mind map tutor to go from the linear world to the mind mapping world without losing information and capturing the essence of what I've learned. I'd really like to hear your thoughts. So you can email me with your thoughts. I'd like to know. And you can comment on Facebook, where I'll actually post a link to this video. Until next time, keep well.